The Genesis Talks is like a beating heart of ideas and connections. Conversations with visionaries, luminaries that never lets us get complacent.
We are gathered here this evening in a very special place, the East West Bank Commons, in the shade of LACMA's new David Geffen Galleries. A building that is itself the subject of tonight's conversation. There is something fitting and even poetic about that. Tonight, we are honored to welcome one of the most singular architectural voices of our time, Swiss architect Peter Zumthor. Peter has spent more than 15 years in deep dialogue with LACMA, and the result of that collaboration is the building above us and around us tonight. Michael has spent nearly 2 decades transforming LACMA into one of the greatest museums in the world. His long creative partnership with Peter has been at the heart of this transformation. And tonight's conversation is a rare opportunity to hear the two of them reflect on what they have built together and why. Please join me in welcoming Michael Govan and Peter Zumthor.
Thank you all for being here. You know, when we sell out, and I think we sold out at whatever, 900 people, usually there's a drop-off rate and we don't have to add extra seats and standing room only. Peter, that's for you. One expression of the appreciation. People have been coming up to me in the last few days and expressing appreciation for your building, Peter. So tonight we are going to reflect a little bit. The last time we had a big talk at LACMA, it was in the theater that is no longer. We have a new theater opening, but we designed this space for the outdoors. It was in 2013. I had black hair. And we were talking about what was possible at LACMA and about your architecture. And by that time you had one of some of those prizes, but we talked about how we were thinking about this building, and you were honestly without a lot of pressure. We were still thinking. In fact, we had no money at all, which is a blessing, because we were just thinking without pressure. And we've kept that going. So tonight, I thought, Peter, maybe I could ask you to have some reflection on that. We're also going to invite Peter back again, hopefully in the fall when the theater is open, for more conversation. But it is worth noting, if I could take a through line. You spoke at the press conference very powerfully about Los Angeles. So I want to talk a little about LA. You taught at SciArc for a year. You made your first lecture in English in, I think it's 1988. And I remember that lecture so well. We unearthed it for our exhibition in 2013. And at the beginning of the lecture, you talk about your vision of architecture, and you talk about opening the door of your aunt's in your aunt's garden and going into her space and then into the kitchen. And it seems so simple. And yet I remember hearing that, and it kind of rocked my world, because you talked about the atmosphere, that it was made of simple things, but there was an atmosphere that was unforgettable. And your vision of architecture was not kind of what it looked like, but the atmosphere of how it felt and what it meant. And when we began this journey, we had a few basic principles, but I said, it's going to look like whatever you want it to look like, because you will go on a journey yourself. So it's been 20 years of a journey of thinking, talking. We got more serious as we went on. And here we are. And I thought we could talk a little about the results, starting with, we're here in a space that you designed for California, for the sunset, for shade, for outdoors. And so maybe we could even, like, we're right here. We have some slides here, but we're right here in this space with this fantastic overhang, this sandwich of space with the we have like two canopies. And maybe I could ask you a little bit about, how you feel about this result, and we can talk a little about what we achieved.
I feel very good.
Well, that's a good start. I was worried he was going to say something else. No.
So please ask me a concrete question.
Well, you had some, okay, I will then. You had some things you wanted to say, but let's talk about the building type. Let's talk about architecture.
Okay.
Because you now resulted, we didn't know what it was going to look like. There was no precedent. You didn't start with, I want it to look like this, or I want it to look like that. And you said in that lecture in 1988 that your building shouldn't have a kind of obvious historical reference. You said that then. So now you have this thing, and I've never seen anything like it.
Neither did I.
Okay, so what type of building is this that we got after all that?
Okay, it's a long story. It usually takes 20 years. I'm not starting with a building type. I like to study the site and what people want and what comes to my mind. And I have did museums before, and these museums I made as a spiral climbing up. So this is how I did this in Bregenz, and I did the same thing in Cologne, Germany. But I think we should go a step ahead. And I was very happy to find you as a friend to really make these steps ahead here.
Many steps.
Many steps, right. So one interest we shared from the beginning, there were actually many interests. We shared the interest that the whole museum should be on one floor. We shared the interest that we both said, don't tell it anybody, but we like small museums, not big ones, okay? He also said this, you wouldn't believe it, okay? And then we shared the interest, I think you did too, but at least I did, but you will tell me, for the daylight from the side, as the most natural way of looking at things and living with. And so I'm almost a little bit against big skylights. But for the art, we looked at art pieces, and we put sculptures in front of the side light. And I think that for me, this is a really noble light, and it's a natural light. That's what you have here. So many of these elements, light is one of them, shadow will be the next, start to shape a building type, which I have no idea what it was at the beginning. But it's not a good start in such a case to start with the building type. Too narrow.
Yes, I agree. In fact, just on the light, we talked about daylight, that we love daylight, especially for objects that weren't meant for museums, and spotlights. You had a lot of different light, and then at one moment, you just decided side light, which was amazing because most museums favor paintings, love top light, and we have two buildings full of north-facing top light. But rarely do museums focus on side light. And you just said side light, which is fantastic for sculpture and all of the incredible things we have in this collection, like ancient art that was outside. So we just let the light, we have so many works of stone and ceramic that are used to. And Diana Magaloni, I'm sure you're here somewhere, we were talking about these ancient works from ancient Americas that hadn't seen the light of day for maybe 500 years because they've been in museums under spotlights. So that light is so beautiful.
My mother looked much better with light from the side than from the top, you know. Me too. So the next step was then that we said, I said, I don't remember, it has to be deep, the building, so that the side light can enter and it gets darker and darker. Curators don't make switches and say make it light or dark. They travel with the object until the object it's light enough or it's dark enough. And that's what we have here. So that's a natural way of go with the piece to the shadow you want. But what's very important, you can see this upside. I love it a lot. It gets darker, and the darker it gets, the shadow, you see the light from the opposite side.
Right.
Doesn't get any better in architecture, I think, that you have these deep shadows, and then it gets lighter again. And I'm very glad that you said yes to this concept to explore it.
Well, because you took care of everything we needed. This, I always say light, and he always says shadow, because you very clearly state that shadow is the evidence of the sun. That's your statement, and that light in mathematically it falls off with the square of the distance. It falls off as you come from the edges, and so you had this vision that the light would be at the edges, and you wouldn't walk through the museum like a line, but you would walk out to light and views and then back into shadow. And in the shadow, we could protect the fragile textiles or the photographs that we needed to. And up here, my discovery was you can have a gallery with very fragile textiles in dimness. And in most museums, you go dim room, dim room, dim room. But here you can sit there with those textiles and look out at a palm tree on the edge.
Yeah, this was also an idea we shared, I think, of early on, that we said Los Angeles, the now time of Los Angeles should be present at the museum.
Everywhere.
Everywhere. I hate this old type of museum where you have to go up a flight of stairs, there come these columns, and then the entrance, and then you go inside, and then everything is corridors and dark, and you're in another world. I think we wanted to break this. We wanted to make a museum which at all time connects to the city. I'm looking at art now, okay? In this moment, I'm looking at art. I'm not trying to think how it was when these pieces of art we see, because I would be wrong in imagining. We cannot know, okay? But what we know is that we can appreciate art now. And I think that's, I think it, for me, it works pretty good. I have my stroll, I'm strolling around, and I orient over to the city, and I get lost, I look out, then I see, but there's a feeling of art happens now, and we experience art now. So this kind, we can talk for a moment about this very specific layout of this museum, which is with closed spaces with one entrance only, and you say this, you go on. It's a village, you always say.
Well, so, okay, I've written down now time as now my new phrase, now time, like in this time, right now. And it works. I asked for transparency, no idea there would be windows 360 degrees around, looking at the Hollywood sign, the sunset, the sunrise, the weather. So now time is not only in Los Angeles now, I realize now time is it cloudy? Is it the morning? Is it the afternoon? It's now time. And every time you're in the museum, it is completely different, which is for me so exciting because I thought I have this idea that we look at art differently over time. History is always changing, and that we say in English, we see things always in a different light, which in this building is actual. We see things in a different light depending on all those things. And then the circulation. We both said we hate linear time and linear understandings of experience. And so we went back and forth. Peter, you talked about the courtyards as clearings in the forest, and I saw them as, we talked about a park. I didn't want a line either. So you came up with many possible scenarios. When I look at what we have, I often say, it looks just like Haldenstein, where you come from. Because in Haldenstein, you have a terrace up the hill where you can look out over the valley. And then you have these streets into courtyards. And then you go into houses. And then you come back to the courtyard. I don't know. So I see this idea of that I said park at the original, but now I see it more like a village. I don't know how you see it.
Yeah, I guess it's a very old, ancient kind of principle of placing houses and connecting them together. So we use this here. This was maybe difficult to understand, that the space is flowing around the houses. There are also exhibition space, right. Okay? This, you have to experience this, how this works. That you see, now I'm outside, I'm the square outside and so on, I could look out. And then I go into the house. I go into the house, and very important, one entrance is also the exit, okay? Mm-hmm. So this makes a close experience in there, which I think works pretty well. Even though my son today said, hey, this long guy in there with the 2 doors is also really cool. Okay.
That's for emergency egress. When they got bigger, they had to have 2 entrances. There are only 4 galleries like that, yeah. And they're cool.
Yeah. So it's also, then we have a clearly artificially lit area, the house, which then has gotten some color. We can talk about this later. This is also something special. And of course, a museum like that is a little bit against somebody telling me what this means and what is this and what is this. This is a bit my character that I want to find out myself. I think I'm not alone with this, okay? So I don't want to go through the didactical path. Mm-hmm. I want to experience these things you have here, the wonderful things, and I have to see what appeals to me. And that's my path through the museum. I'm interested in this, and I look in here, not interested. And so I can get closer to the objects you have. Mm-hmm. The objects which have come from a time of which we don't know too much, or we think maybe we know something, but the next generation of historians will tell us it was all wrong. It's like this, or this can happen. But the immediate experience of the piece of art, that's the idea.
So we always knew that the radical thing is the circulation. Like, that is radical. The idea that you wander. Our guide is called Wander. We wrote a text to try to see if we could invite people to a different experience, which is to wander. It comes from both of our mistrust of being told what happens in a linear narrative. I think for you, it also has to do with comfort. Like, if people can wander through a park, why can't they wander through a museum and find their own interests?
Discover.
Right, because you take a fork in the road. It's true in Central Park, too, with Olmsted. You go this way, you go this way. You end up at the same place, but through a different experience, a path, which is a little like life. Right, so this wandering was so central to your thinking.
the physical experience of the thing you look at comes first. This is basic. And afterwards come explanations. I'm not against any kind of academic or whatever explanations, not at all. Sometimes I go there and I don't understand what the heck is this? Where does this come from? And so on. But I'm a Heidegger scholar enough that I want to experience. I'm not a Heidegger scholar. This was just forget.
Yeah, no, but
The experience comes first.
right. And there's a lot of, I mean, so there was this idea too that, you know, we have the internet, we have virtual spaces, we have a lot of ways to get information. And your architecture is always about experience. The technical term, I guess, is atmosphere, but it's about what it feels like, you even say what it smells like, what do you feel? And we would often have exercises about a decision, and you would say to the group, not to me, what do you think? Like, quick, I need your quick answer. What would your grandmother think? Like, there's this idea you have evolved that there's this, it's hard to get to this space where it has feeling, and sometimes we have to fight the academic impulse.
This was Christina, when she did the floor, she said, took me a while to find out what interests you. But then I found it out, it's emotions. It's all about emotions.
Yeah.
She is right. At the end, is, I think, what counts if you build something for a special use,
Right.
that the emotions are right and they help you to use the piece and to see it. And so in this case, you know, I always call most of your objects hit a homeless object. They have lost their home. Okay. And I don't know whether they feel good or bad, but I want to do the best that when they come in this house here, they really feel good. And consider the objects, I'm talking of the object, consider this to be a new home.
A new home, yeah. We talk about it a lot, even in education, about emotional learning. If you can learn something emotionally, it's very, very strong held. And so that's one of the reasons I was so interested in your work, because it seemed to embed this deep sense of feeling and memory, which was related to our practice in art. The other, maybe to get back to the home issue, so the windows all around Los Angeles. You talked about your love for Los Angeles. We talked about it in New York. Who knew that we'd be in Los Angeles? But you kept changing the building in relation to Los Angeles. So it's not just liking Los Angeles, and people say, oh, it doesn't look like Los Angeles. But what we did over all those years, by 2013 or 12, we had the section of the building. You were going to lift the galleries and create public space below. That was the concept. Yeah. And you would be able to walk through. Then we had a challenge because the Museum of Natural History, the scientist wanted more space for research on the site. And that's when I felt, well, we couldn't get the big horizontal, non-hierarchical floor plate. And I looked across the street, and it was your building that was already lifted for walking. And I suggested, well, maybe we could drive under it too. And that was the story of how the building, as you say, had to learn to cross Wilshire Boulevard.
Did it learn it?
It did learn. I think it learned. People would stop me and say, oh, you're ruining Wilshire Boulevard. But there's a kink in the road that you actually can't see through Wilshire on a line except out. Right. But so it was so interesting that the building was already maybe willing to learn.
Yeah.
Is that right? I don't know. Like I now think of it as like the essential element to this building is that
it was a time when the building had to learn many things. Many of these things it learned were wrong, you know. So I had to say, no, don't learn this, learn something else. So, yeah, trying to find the time, trying to find all these things. So I remember the building early on. Now, first of all, I have to confess, there was a master plan. And the master plan had a line from down there to up here. But I was faithful to master plan, you know, you should always follow a master plan. And then I did this, and I mean, for half a year or a year, it just didn't look good, it didn't look right, okay? And you were about to fire me, you never told me. But
it is kind of true, but I think you were going to quit first because the site wasn't working.
It was not working. And then the next morning I didn't sleep too long, and we got up early and so on. And when he came, there was the old model. And then I swiped the whole.
Yeah, with his bare hands, he literally tore up his own model and like threw it away. And you went to the blackboard.
I went to the blackboard and I was drawing this in a way. This. I said, I'm like in a cage, okay? I have the fence and I have this long axis. I should continue this axis and all the things I have to do, you know, with the street, with the tar pit. I should be friendly here and there. And this is not just a grid where I can set in and say, no, I'm fine. Okay, this was a breakthrough. So the organic shape, and then came the black flower. We presented the black flower here, and only afterwards we heard that we were a bit too big here. And then you encouraged me to cross the line. And since the Pan Am building in New York, nobody has went over a big thing. But you encouraged me and the authorities of Los Angeles, and yeah, we could try. What a miracle. Miracle Mile.
Okay, where's more miracles? It's true. I mean, it becomes a defining feature because you cross the grid. I mean, it wasn't just that. You kept fussing with these curves in relation to the Pavilion for Japanese Art and in relation to the neighbors who complained on one side. You pushed it away. You kept shaping it until it, I mean, several people have come up to me and said over these last months that the building feels like it was always there, that it sits there. I know that's one of the principles of your architecture, and one of the reasons I was interested in your work is that no two buildings look the same at all. You always come to a place, and somehow that place starts to inform everything.
I think for me, this is the most interesting thing in my profession, in respect of inventing buildings which resonate with the place and come clearly out of what they have to do. And of course, at the end, the most important is people should love it. Mm-hmm. Okay? That's the most important. So I'm not trying to make a statement of mine or anything or for the history of architecture. The compliment is people look at this and say, hey, this is beautiful, or hey, I like to look at this. I admit that's how this is. But the interesting thing is I would not jump on any premature conclusions until I'm sure this has to be like that. And you know it's a long travel, okay? Was it too long for you?
Well, actually, the last museum director you worked with, I said, how was it to work with Peter Zumthor? And he said, well, it took 18 years, but it was great. So, by the way, that's why
maybe 12.
That's right. I started early. Yeah. No, watching the shape evolve. We talked about. I know I told you I loved ancient things. We were staring at the La Brea tar pits, which is the Ice Age, which is the beginnings of art history, because that's the time when humans are there. It's not prehistory, and then you evolve. I was in love with concrete because I had seen you work with concrete, but then you evolved this thing on a larger scale. So I want to, on one level, it's one thing. So it's everybody says it's a big building. It's 3 football fields long, but it's one thing. You once described it as like a pot because it's all made out of concrete. It's all one thing. So maybe say something about small and large. People also said, oh, you can't make a big building. I was like, what architect starts with big buildings? And the building's kind of the same everywhere. So maybe you can reflect. We talked a lot about size and one material.
So if I'm setting out to study the site and give an answer to the site conditions, at the end, so I can look at the neighborhood, I can look at the city, I can look at the continent, and at the end I can look also at the history of the continent and what would I imagine, or what do we know of old buildings of this continent, and so on. So here it was the size, okay? So this building I could never build in Switzerland. Okay.
True.
Yeah. Okay. It's the land. Here, this is a large this is a long horizon. And also the tradition of buildings here, if I look at Inca things, which come out, or I looked a lot at Oscar Niemeyer, an Austrian who comes to here, and all of a sudden the small Austrians, little houses are gone, or whatever. So it was a scale thing. And this, I was interested in it. I liked that we have the horizontal, that we lift a little bit up, and so on. But it was not easy. I think, but don't tell anybody, but I looked at many of my models of this building and said, they look strange. There's something wrong. Or what building is this? Why do this? And only the bigger I made the models, the more they became right. Mm-hmm. And now, needless to say, this here is the best.
We have the big model right here. Exactly. No, it did. The scale, we talked a lot about scale, like big and small enough to be intimate, that you could walk around and feel it and not be, endlessly lost, but also big enough to be something civic. You were interested in this idea of public space from the beginning. That's why we have the shade and all of these spaces for events and dinners and concerts and films. You wanted to use the horizontal, not just for this idea we had of art, but for everything else.
I think you too, we have both the idea. I had it that LA, after the development of, 200 years or something, is it 100? I don't know. It's now the time to mature as an urban system and start to produce public spaces. Okay? But that's what we have been. This is a great gift. And I'm not criticizing LA. I think every city needs a time to come into existence. Mm-hmm. But now this is the time, I think.
Yeah.
And that's what we wanted to do.
Yeah,
and I'm extremely happy to see that you paid for this. So many people paid.
Many people, all of you who paid for it, raise your hand, because it's most of the people here in some way.
Because any value engineer will come to, hey, this is double price. If you go up and then you create all these things here, so to say, for free, which have nothing directly to do with the building. This is a gift to the city.
Yeah.
And where should it's a good place to do this here in this central area, and with a building which is not commercial but about art.
Yes. Yes. And that is, I mean, even just this idea of shade, which is becoming more important in Los Angeles. This is actually, I know it's a little cool right now, but in the summer, the shade's going to mean everything. This is, by the way, the first public event we're having in this space to prove that it exists. So public space is very much part of that. I want to say one other kind of complicated idea that I think is interesting. Again, I was interested in ancient things. LA, our buildings, you know, the average life of a building in LA is something like 30 years because of seismic codes, and we're tearing down and rebuilding. And we talked about, you know, again, in the midst of the tar pit, something that not only might last, but felt it had an ambiguity of time. I had this idea, it was like primordial modernism, something that has this ambiguity of time. It looks modern, could look a little ancient. We had to sign a lot of release forms to let the floor crack. Because we wanted the floors to crack rather than cutting.
We paid the craftsmen to make.
We paid extra because you could put control joints in that are modern, or you could just let the floor crack and make its own and be part of nature. But can we talk a little about that? It was a thing that you percolated too, this idea of the ambiguity where it feels old, it feels new. It's actually not one or the other.
Yeah, it's something I discovered through my work, and I like this a lot. If I could do something which feels a little bit, maybe this could be older than everything else around.
Mm-hmm.
So it resonates to the history of the place.
Mm-hmm.
And no, I don't know how I do this. I have no idea, but I want to do it. I think it's a compliment when somebody says, this could have been here before. Okay. Yeah. Anchoring in the ground, yeah. Responding to the ground, to the place you stand. And this is something many buildings never had it, and a lot of them have lost it. And that's my passion.
Yeah. Yes, I think you accomplished that. It's in your work. It's one of the things I love about your work. And I think so many people literally came up to me and said, oh, it looks like an old building or an ancient building. And I think that's a beautiful thing. I am fond of saying now that we spent so much money engineering the seismic system. Because this entire building, all 3 football fields long, and there's some people here who helped with that, can move 5 feet in any direction in a seismic event so that it can withstand time. And so maybe you designed it to look like the oldest building. Who knows? It might be the oldest building someday because it is built to last. We are not replacing it anytime soon.
The shacks left and right are all gone.
Yes, that's right. And hopefully it won't leak either. It has a nice roof.
Yeah, if you believe in all of this engineering, but I think I believe in it.
Yeah.
It's quite a thing that this whole piece as a whole thing would move together, and so, but Eric Long told me it will.
It will.
Let's see.
Actually, let's not see. We're not wanting to see that at all. Let's just have that idea that it can last forever and then not see that. Because if this building moves, we'll have other issues. Okay, I'm going to take you back to the very first question then. So with all the engineering and all that, we were talking a little about what this building type is. And you said, I mean, in the end, you didn't set out to do this, but it has a little feeling of like infrastructure, of a bridge or something that's not like a house.
This is what slowly then came out. We wanted to have it up and spread it out in plan and so on. We had to cross the street. And I had the houses up there, so some of the houses became pillars. 10 of the houses up there, they come
To
down.
this wall.
And in a certain interval, the houses become pillars. 10 we have here, and then the other houses in between connect the two plates. So this becomes like this is called virondelle truss, which doesn't have diagonals. So this is the upper thing is actually the two plates working together, and then the feet coming down. So maybe it's not so easy to see the bridge. I'm glad. You don't see the bridge. Forget it. It's a building, but this is.
But it's infrastructure. It holds itself up,
True.
and it creates shade. I mean, it's an infrastructure for shade and public space, right? It has a canopy, like a tree or something.
Yeah, all of these 10 huge pillars, they contain the technique.
Right.
Okay. So the technique is not a central piece somewhere. Now comes the image of the trees, right? So there is the infrastructure in the tower and distributes like the top of a tree, right? And then they touch each other.
Yes.
So it's a nice story to say.
You did. You drew trees for me early on of this idea of the trees joining in like the canopy joins. Right. I hear some trees like that, just like that.
Yeah.
Okay, one more topic just to take us from this idea of public space, infrastructure, shade for people, events, no hierarchies, so that it feels like the Los Angeles that we're in with many peoples and no hierarchies. We see out, the times of the day matter. But also when we go inside, people have remarked on there's no other word for me than intimacy. I've had people, like, there's a row of, we're talking with Diana Magaloni, gold ground paintings from the 14th century. And, and Leah Lembeck, I don't know if she's here, our curator, and somebody said, they look so immediate and they're right here in front of me. Like, why aren't they behind glass? And Leah said, well, they've never been behind glass, ever. It's the way they're shown. But there's something about this building where I have heard reaction after reaction, like almost it just feels so strong to look at an object in this environment. And I know there are many things you did, from the way Reiko Sudo's brilliant curtains filter the light, and you imagine curtains so that the light would have architecture, the side light itself, which becomes shadow. But you've set up a condition for seeing, and in the houses, one of the finishing touches, if you will, to your concept was that Peter always said, the houses, you go inside, the light's different, the electric light's different you designed, the sound is different, and you always talked about the walls being different. And then we debated this for years. You had different approaches to it. You couldn't get anything. We tried color systems, paint looked bad. And I know you said, I want like just pigment. And then we went over to an exhibition on Mesoamerican color and saw the work of Porfirio Gutierrez and saw his pigment on volcanic stone. And you said, that's what I want. And then we didn't know how to do that.
No idea.
But through a long process, you found, we were talking about miracles on Miracle Mile, but can you say something about the way that the galleries, we came to this idea, you came to this idea of color, dark, moody, beautiful. People say it looks like velvet. It's very intimate.
This was a miracle in a way, because it didn't work with ordinary paint. This just created, as you said, like what is this, a coat or something like that.
Coating, flat.
Coating, flat, and so this
concrete disappeared.
Concrete disappears, and so what could we do, what we have done now? I'll tell you in a moment how we found it. It's actually like you stain wood, you can now here stain concrete. And you can, so the pigment is microscopic. You don't see it. And then it's silicate, it goes directly, connects through the stone of the concrete. And I think the concrete can even become more beautiful because you see all the mistakes or the irregularities of the making, which we love a lot. And this is still there. It's even stronger. So this was a miracle. It came to mind a firm in Switzerland who has over generations made the architectural colors, and they're really good. And then I found he's now my best friend. You know,
He's here somewhere. Where are you, Marius?
And he came to my office and put this in the basement on the concrete wall. And I saw this, and I saw how he made it. He could also said, look at this here. I'm coming from the white, and then I'm going to the blue. And here I'm going from the black, and I'm coming to the blue. So you can hear he works in layers like a painter. Okay, and as you see up there, that's how this is made. And this was another miracle, you're right, that we got this, that Marius came here, he did this with American, he trained American painters, and they did a really good job. I'm very happy.
And he worked with our scientists, and we figured out everything, including how to patch and work with it in the future. It is a miracle. That was one of the many miracles. Maybe just to end, I want to say this other thing that's very unique is this building is very handmade. I went to the studio once, and you think about architects, and now they're all on computer screens and, you know, like CAD systems and models and 3D printing. And I went to Haldenstein once, and Peter was on a ladder tearing pieces of paper and letting them drop on the floor to see where they landed, like chance.
This was John Cage.
I know it was John Cage, and that's how you were figuring out the gallery arrangement, is on a ladder, tearing a piece of paper, letting them drop. This is the furthest thing from a CAD system I'd ever seen, computer system. But it's just one image of your hand sketches, the handmade, and I don't know if you can tell the story about the concrete workers. 10,000, Carlos told me, 10,000 hands touched this building. Human beings made this building. And usually you cover up the concrete and you put a surface on it, but every worker will be able to take their great grandchildren to see this craft, this work, this physical thing, which I know means so much to you. And there was a day when I got the message there was an error in the formwork and the concrete didn't come out smooth. And was I going to inform Peter Zumthor? Were they going to fix it before he got there? And I said, no. Just, we'll have a meeting, talk to Peter.
They were alarmed. Okay, it was not just a little piece; it was a whole door.
Okay, it was a little piece.
But they were prepared to say they can fix it and so on. So I told them, thank you. Look, I have seen what you're doing here on the side, and I think you're doing a great job. Okay, and it happens. You know, what is every once in a while, you have to accept something. And I said, and if something like this happens, you have to be aware that you are working on a sculpture of concrete. And sculptures are never mended, okay? So
never mended.
Huh?
They're never mended.
Never mended, yeah. So please leave this as it is and be sure to show it, go there with your grandchild and chat. That's where we made a mistake. Okay. I'm sure you know what I mean, that it's beautiful that you can see human beings have made this. Usually this, as you say, this is covered and is clad with all kinds of things. Buildings where you can see the traces of the human labor to do them, they are the most emotional and beautiful things if they're designed right. And I can see this if I look at the slick architecture of today, where all the concrete, not important, all these, you call it superstructure, disappears and so on, and they put on a layer, 1 millimeter thick of slickness, okay? But this, you can then, it's prefabricated in the factory, you don't need any skilled labor anymore, hardly on the site. And that's a big loss, okay? I think that's a wrong way of building, okay? So this building is also my manifest to say, let's go back to the real thing.
Yeah. In fact, the workers got very perfect.
Yeah.
They got very good at this. And you came once.
Yeah, it was so perfect that they liked that I loved what they do. So this gave a good relationship. So when I was walking on the scaffolding, one guy would say, "The bad old man," or some stuff like that. So it sounded cool. And they were so perfect that I said, "Listen, from now on, you have to make a mistake every 3 weeks."
True story. With that, I hope you have some sense and feeling of how much handwork, emotion, love, precision, thousands and thousands of people. And I just want to express from our community, this Los Angeles building that looks out and invites us in and gives us shade and spaces like this for events, for just to say we are just so grateful for your hands and your handwork and your mind, and for giving us all this beautiful, beautiful work. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you.